Yeah, so welcome everyone. It's a great pleasure to have all of you here, and we are so happy that you made it online and in person. And we start with the first panel, where the draft unpublished papers are presented by distinguished guests who have normally 15 minutes. We scheduled, as you know, 4 speakers, but unfortunately one person couldn't make it due to an accident, but she's fine. But unfortunately, Elena Savic will not be present, but we still have three papers and a distinguished discussant as well. My name is Marton Rovid. I'm a visiting professor at the Romani Studies program, and I will just briefly introduce you the panelists and the papers. So firstly, we'll start with Sergen, we are very proud that he is an alumni of the Roma Graduate Preparation Program. Right now, he's a research associate at Necmettin University, if I pronounce well, and he's presenting a paper on the impact of modernization, industrialization policies on Roma communities in Turkey, an environmental justice study on the Ergene Basin. Then we will move on with the second paper written by Driton, Berisha, and Beatrice Lindstrom. Berisha is a grassroots team leader of the Opre Kosovo organization in Pristina, Kosovo. And Beatrice Lindstrom is a clinical instructor and lecturer in law in the International Human Rights Clinic at Harvard Law School. You have access to the longer abstracts and biographies. I encourage you to read because these are really impressive biographies, and we are very privileged to have all these scholars here. But now I just introduce very briefly. And today the last speaker is Eva Schwab, who is an awesome postdoctoral fellow at the CU Democracy Center. And the first discussant is Tamara Steger, whom you could hear in the welcoming panel, who is associate professor at the Department of Environmental Sciences and Policy here at CU. So I would invite first Sergen, and I will put on your PowerPoint. And you can have your presentation from here or come up here as each of you prefers. And I think now it's probably visible, yeah. And this is working as well, yeah. You have still 15 minutes. Yeah, the floor is yours, yeah.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thanks for the opportunity to be here to share our results. I would like to start with the first slide because of the time constraint. My research topic is the impact of the Turkish industrialization and modernization policy on Roma community and environmental justice case study on Ergene Basin. Before explaining this, I would like to draw your attention to the main reasons of the environmental inequalities, environmental racism, and environmental injustice. Environmental injustice is rooted in discriminatory law, parliamentary racism, industrialization, neoliberalization, capitalism, and equity. Due to the fact that environmental injustice cases are often legacy of social injustice in many cases. For that reason, I think that we should examine environmental cases in chronological order. Today, I will talk about Turkey. Turkey is a big country. More than 6 million of Roma people are living in Turkey and are divided into 3 parts, Rom, Dom, Lo. I will talk about the Rom people who are living in the west part of Turkey. Also, this region is known as Ergene Basin or some part of the Marmara region. In order to understand the roots of the environmental injustice in Ergene Basin, I will examine firstly discriminatory laws in Ottoman Empire and Turkish Republic. Let's start with the Ottoman Empire. In Ottoman Empire, Roma were labeled as a which refers to Egyptian Roma, and they were characterized as a morally weak group and difficult to control. And there are lots of racist laws in Ottoman Empire that can be found in official records. But I don't want to talk about deeply. I would like to pass to early Turkish Republic. After the Ottoman Empire, Turkish Republic was established, and the religion's understanding was abundant, and Turkishness movement was started. Everyone living in Turkey at that period was recognized as a Turk, except Roma. In 2026, when the Modernization Manifest has been applied, Roma defined as a group not affiliated to Turkish culture. This settlement law creates two different groups in Turkey, Roma and non-Roma, which are not equal to each other, considering to economical and social and environmental justice. Another important movement at that time was the agricultural revolution. The newly established Turkish Republic wanted to make agricultural revolution, and immigrants who came from the Greece play important role for this revolution. The population exchange period took place between the Greece and Turkey in 1924, and Roma were settled on agricultural land in Turkey. The densely most populated area was Ergene Basin, as you can see on the map. The reason was the contribute to rice production there. We are passing to another discriminatory law in Turkey. In 1930s, it was decided that Roma must be distributed to Turkish village to be assimilated. In 1956, Roma were described as a potential criminals, and police should take actions against them. And also in the archive records say that Roma migrants did not receive any share of the agricultural land distributed to migrants who came from the Greece at the population exchange period. This reminds me of a book named A Different Mire. This book explains Indians who have limited rights over the use of the land, and Ronald provides evidence of how environmental racism was deeply rooted and has existed always in the land where Indians live. If you look at from this perspective, we can argue that environmental injustice has a long story in Ergene Basin. And there is a historical continuance of the environmental inequalities in Ergene Basin. And another important movement was the industrialization policy of Turkey. The biggest industrialization policy of Turkey was established in 1990s in Ergene Basin. More than 3,000 factories were built near to the Ergene River, and they discharged their industrial liquids into the Ergene River. Ergene River became the Turkish most polluted river, and ecological issue has been occurred, such as soil contamination, food insecurity, reducing biodiversity, and also this pollution put 90% of its habitat to cancer risk. The pollution of the Ergene River is reported on the also environmental justice map, as you can see in the right side. Lots of action plans have developed to clean up the Ergene River, but none of them addresses to Roma community, which is the most vulnerable ethnic group in the region. My article addresses to identity and pollution issue in the Ergene River, using the environmental injustice framework. To do this, I used biographical narrative analysis, and I interviewed with the 5 people who have both daily experience and expert knowledge with the Ergene Basin. And my first interview was with Ahmet. I connected with the Ahmet. Ahmet was a third generation of the Roma Muslim migrants whose family came from the Greece at the population exchange period. After a short conversation, I asked Ahmet where he was from. He said that actually we are Thessaloniki migrants with the Hasidic tone. Then he told me about the migration stories his family told him. After that, Ahmet said that they write Coptic and migrants on people's identity cards, so we were never seen as a real Turkish citizens. These interviews shows us institutional racism and institutional marginalization of Roma community in Ergene Basin. Then Ahmet said that when I was young, I want to be a soldier. I had to change my residential address, so Roma could not work in the agricultural sector at that time. This also shows evidence that Roma living in segregated and stigmatized settlements were unable to find a job because of the legal regulation at that time. Then Ahmed explained how the beauty of the past has been transformed into the synthetic pollution of today. He said that when I was young, I could swim in the Ergene River, I could fish in the Ergene River, even I could drink the water of the Ergene River. But now it is not possible to swim. When I cross the bridge of the Ergene River, I must cover or close my nose. Actually, I shocked when he said, I wish the river had been polluted 100 years ago. Then he explained, as an agricultural worker, Roma are not seen as a member of the society and marginalized by the local community. So this polluted river is an opportunity for Roma to migrate industrial cities where they can live as a humanly and are not marginalized again. There are so many Roma settlements in the riverbeds in Ergene Basin. I talk with the people who are living in the both riverbeds. I talk, sorry. Something happened. Yes. When I talk to people who are living in the Meriç riverbed, say that Roma have to drink drinking water polluted by the Ergene. They have to cook with that water and they have to bathe their children with that water because they don't have any economic opportunity to protect themselves from the environmental degradation. When I talk with the people who are living in the Ergene riverbed, say that we are losing our population and becoming unemployment. Because the polluted river has decreased the agricultural activity in the Ergene Basin, Roma people as an agricultural worker, they are becoming unemployed and start to migrate. In order to check this interview, I look at the population data of town. The population data of town has decreased 18% in 70 years, which is a more than 1% in a year. And in order to understand identity and pollution issue in the Ergene Basin, I talked with Ayşe, who is a political science expert. She said that pollution gain identity in the Ergene Basin. If you ask the Roma where the Roma settlement is, they will say that they are living near to the polluted river. Is it possible to escape from the environmental injustice? To answer this question, I contact with the Utku. Utku was an agricultural worker who migrated to the industrial city. Let's look at the settlement which lives Utku. Here is the map, and this is the, I think, here is the map. This is the living space, and it is the industrial zone. Utku is living here. When I talk with Utku, Utku say that everything smells plastic here. Even when I breathe, my throat gets burned. When we wash the items, the top of the items gets soggy and dirty from the chemicals. We can argue that Roma people living in the Ergene river bed facing environmental injustice related to water pollution. When they migrate, they are facing the environmental degradation related to especially air pollution. This is a little bit personal story, but I would like to say, Angela. My father was living in the same settlement with Utku, which is near to the industrial zone. I lost my father because of the lung cancer. I think there is a relationship, but I don't have any evidence on my hand. Now we are passing to another things. This is also from the Ergene Basin. Here is the Turkey's most polluted stream. It flows sometimes blue, sometimes red. Because of the textile factories, and Roma settlement is living. Roma settlement is near to the Turkish most polluted river as well. Another case from the Tekirdağ Aydoğdu settlement. Here is the industrial zone, and this is the Roma settlement again. This is the most polluted settlement, according to air quality calculations reports. 20% of deaths were caused by the air pollution here. There are lots of things to say, like ecological issues, water and soil contamination, lost biodiversity, and segregation. But I would like to conclude my presentation with the sentence. Roma people see themselves as victims of the environmental injustice, which is a legacy of the social justice. All of the participants argues that environmental benefit and harm are not distributed equally. And policy neglects Roma. This is a lack of the recognition and lack of the participation. And income balance and unemployment, there are lots of things. But I would like to thank to you for listening to me and your attention. But I need water.
Thank you so much for the great presentation. Yeah. Please, maybe at the end of the table, if you take a seat and we move on to the next speaker. But thank you for this great presentation. Do you prefer to present from there, or you want to come up here as you wish?
Well,
You have there is a remote here, and you can see up there. Yeah. Yes, please. The floor is yours. Yeah.
Well, hello everyone. I'll start by introducing myself. So I'm Driton from Kosovo, the Kosovo movement, slightly a new movement, and today we're going to, together with Beatrice, discuss a paper that focuses on the lead poisoning Roma communities in Kosovo. The place we're going to discuss is Mitrovica, and most probably you're already aware the lead poisoning that was very much famous, but at the same time quite forgotten. Just currently, right now, there are already problems in the north of Kosovo, and there's a conflict, and of course, once again, we don't hear much about the Roma and their position, just as we don't hear about transportation in Belgrade and any consideration about Roma.
Can we ask you to speak up, because some people online are following us, but if you can speak a bit louder. Thank you so much. Yeah.
So, just after the war, as the aftermath of the NATO bombing in 1999, the conflicts between ethnic Serbian and ethnic Albanian people have continued. And as such, we have had in the north of Mitrovica about 8,000 Roma leave, and as a result of their houses being broken down, threats, and the problems they have. So only about 600 remain in Mitrovica and seek refuge from the United Nations mission in Kosovo, and the rest flee in the surrounding countries and the EU countries. Yeah. Just briefly before we go into the environmental racism, just forgot to also thank you for having us here. I'm very happy to discuss the environmental racism and actually to remind ourselves of its importance. But at the same time, I feel like this conference and the reason for, as a consequence of writing the paper, we feel much more motivated, and we have already made plans while evaluating the situation, not just in Kosovo, but as well in Europe, to share that we could discuss environmental racism in many ways, and sometimes we document it, and a lot of times we don't document it. something that we should be encouraged for. So going back to the story, UN was planning the government's role from 1999 to 2008 when the Kosovo government took over. UN placed this people as the city refuge from the UN. They placed them into the lands that was lead contaminated as a consequence from the Trepča mine. First of all, they were moved to Živkovac and Kablare, and there were many alarms coming from different human rights activists, later on from World Health Organization. I can't think of any organization that worked on the Roma issues that was not involved in raising the alarm of the lead contamination, which then, of course, resulted for UNMIK to perhaps do a few tries of the examination of what's going on. In 2000, they closed the mine of Trepča. However, they did not deal with the refugee camps that were in fact intended to last only 45 days to 90 days. So they only closed down 13 years later. So the initial plan was 45 to 90 days, and they only shut down like 13 years later. What is important to say before we move on? So the impact on the Roma community that were settled there was huge. They faced many health difficulties, and including human losses. And just only in 2004, there was a girl who died and believed to be as a consequence of the lead poisoning. There was, as I said, different researches that were being conducted from the human rights organizations. At the same time, UNMIK did internal research where they have concluded that they did not have the financial means to perhaps take necessary steps to refer to the problem. But nevertheless, nothing did happen until, as I said, in 2012. Yeah, I think they will pass on to you now.
Before in this direction. Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you. So as Driton has explained, I think this case is somewhat unique among toxic injustice cases, in that the facts of the situation and the causation of the injuries that the Roma community suffered are so well documented, in large part due to the continuous efforts of Roma activists over the years. It is also unique because there's very little question of legal responsibility. So our paper looks specifically at the question of accountability and how one achieves accountability for these kinds of environmental racism injustices. And we looked at the opportunities and limitations specific to turning to the law, and in particular to human rights law, as a way to seek accountability and justice. And so UNMIK, when it became the de facto government in Kosovo, agreed to be bound by international human rights law. And in turn, international law requires that victims of human rights violations have access to effective remedies. The big challenge that faced the victims in this case is that the UN also has sweeping immunity from suit, which means that there really is nowhere in the world one can go to seek accountability when the UN itself is responsible for human rights violations. The only avenue that was available was a claims process that's internal to the UN that sits with the Office of Legal Affairs in far-flung New York City. And victims did turn there in 2011. They tried to seek justice directly from the UN, but did not receive a substantive response for 5 years. During that time, the UN eventually recognized the unique role that UNMIK was playing in Kosovo, its extensive powers and its limited accountability. And in recognition of that, established something called the Human Rights Advisory Panel. This was a unique body that had the power to assess the UN's responsibilities for human rights violations in Kosovo. And so at that point, victims turned to the Human Rights Advisory Panel to try to seek remedies there. As you can see from this kind of crazy chart that tries to capture some of the key events over the course of a 15-year journey to seek reparations from the UN, there was a lot of fits and starts in that the UN took extensive steps to try to limit the ability of the Human Rights Advisory Panel to actually rule in the case, including retroactively changing the rules of the panel, forcing the dismissal of the case. I won't go into the details, but suffice it to say that it was a long and hard-fought path to victory. Finally, in 2016, the Human Rights Advisory Panel did, after a long consideration of the merits of the case, issue a landmark decision that found the UN responsible for human rights violations related to the lead poisoning of the community of Mitrovica. Importantly, in one of the aspects of the decision that I think has received relatively less attention, the opinion also dealt with the question of racial discrimination and the role of racism in resulting in the extended exposure to lead in these camps. And so what the panel did here was it looked specifically at the differential treatment that Roma communities in Mitrovica received compared to other displaced communities in Kosovo. The fact that other communities were relocated more quickly, they took as probative evidence that there was a prima facie case of racial discrimination. And under human rights law, once you establish that there is a prima facie case, the defendants have an opportunity to essentially prove that they had rational justification for keeping this community in these camps for such a long period of time. And instead of mounting that kind of defense, the UN, in its response, I think itself exposed the depths of anti-Roma racism and the extent to which this underlied the UN's failure to act. In particular, the UN blamed the unhealthy lifestyles of Roma people as the cause of lead poisoning, which went against well-established evidence, and argued that because in the the Special Representative's words, have historically lived in substandard conditions, that the UN did not have a responsibility to provide more adequate conditions. Now, this decision, as we analyze in our paper, we believe is an important incremental victory in recognizing anti-Roma racism as a violation of law. Of course, the Human Rights Advisory Panel was by no means the first body to call out the racism at play here, and yet the charges of racism oftentimes did not make it into mainstream narratives around the issue. I think in part because the UN was the perpetrator here, and the UN, of course, generally speaking, has a reputation as the promoter of human rights, of equality. And so it was particularly difficult in this case to really show the extent to which racism played a role, and that's something that we think the Human Rights Advisory Panel was able to contribute. We also think that it's important that the decision ended up essentially recasting the relationship between the marginalized Roma communities and the powerful United Nations into one of duty bearers and rights holders. And so it changed how the two parties were looked at. And in doing so, served as a sort of equalizer that enabled the marginalized communities to overcome the power imbalances and seek justice from the UN. At the same time, we are also very aware of the very harsh limitations of relying on these kinds of bodies to seek justice. So 7 years since the Human Rights Advisory Panel's decision, there has been no reparations for victims. The only thing that the UN has done is to establish a voluntary trust fund that to date has received a single $10,000 donation. Importantly, this trust fund is also geared towards community projects in support of Roma communities in Kosovo more broadly. And we think that the distinction between reparations and community projects is critical here because it also replicates subordinate structures where it places Roma communities in the role of beneficiaries of the UN's benevolence as opposed to rights holders who are owed reparations. At the same time, though, we think that the Human Rights Advisory Panel's decision does provide a foundation for advocacy. And so while we recognize the limitations of legal institutions as reflective of hegemonic structures, we also have sought in our advocacy work to build off of the Human Rights Advisory Panel decision. And I'll turn it back to Driton to say.
Thank you, Beatrice. Well, yeah, I'd like to highlight once again that the UN themselves created the Human Rights Advisory Panel, and then they get the message of you have done decisions based on racial profiling and basically you committed racial discrimination, and therefore they should be given remedies and compensation. As Beatrice said, we have the UN who's created a trust fund, has not apologized to the Roma victims, and there are a collection of facts that even today exist between the Roma victims and even today the Roma families, victims who are now back into their Roma mahalas, they still face health problems. So what with the advocacy that we're trying to do is we're trying to send out a message to you, and we're trying to gather up forces. And one of the ways is perhaps looking to you as well.
Yeah.
And so we would like to have this trust fund be decided by the Roma victims themselves instead of having another general project budget to deal with the general problems of the Roma. And this is basically how the Roma victims express as well. At the same time, by doing that, UN would promote human rights, and it would return the power to Roma to decide for themselves as well. It would promote what it stands for. And we are trying to, of course, have as many governments put or donate into this trust fund, as we only have 10,000 euros. Obviously, it was not taken serious enough. But I feel like we are making some progress, and we're gathering power from governments that we believe are most friendly, more supportive to the Roma community. We are trying to, send out a message that we are not happy with just the general funding, and that basically we have enough facts for the UN to not avoid the conclusion that basically everyone has made, but the UN. And of course, we're going to demand the apology, because we have heard some very disastrous reaction from the UN blaming the Roma victims for their unhealthy lifestyles. And once again, we have this, and UN, as we know, as organization of basically almost all countries of the world. And if it doesn't set up the example for countries as individually on how should such statements not be made, then we will continue to have what we have, and very often governmental racism and discrimination. Opre Roma Kosovo is, as I said at the beginning, just 2 years now existing. We are very lucky to work with the human rights team and Harvard Law School, and we just earlier discussed as well some of the potential plans on addressing environmental racism. But of course, we will not stop, and we are trying to be as strategic as possible because, as we just previously discussed, there is not a port where you can just take the UN to. However, we do believe that there are facts, and it's just a matter of time. But we don't want for the victims, we don't want for years to go and for us to disappear before these victims get justice. And it will be a process, perhaps even a bit longer one, because the hard living conditions of this community has made them to disappear from the northern Berisha, and it's a process to gather them back and get them what they deserve. So yes, is there anything? We have here Sebastian. If you by any chance want to add something, he's also from Opre, Kosovo, and actually there's a much louder voice from Kosovo. So if you feel like you want to.
Perhaps I could only add one of the most important reflections that I had when visiting Mitrovica and Roma people who still live in these camps. And this is a sentence that was said by the back then representative of Roma when the United Nations mission Kosovo was de facto government. And Beatrice said during the COVID time it was very difficult to make a difference between what are the effects of the lead poisoning and what are the effects of the COVID-19. And this is something that still stuck with me because unfortunately even today we still have children that are going different deformations. The Roma people still don't have the opportunity to even test themselves in these camps, because this lead poisoning apparently stays quite a long time in your blood, and the inability to be able to test yourself about where you are now, test the health of the children of the community. It's really something that is quite alarming. We also discuss about possibilities of contacting other Kosovo government officials as well as local municipalities as part of our advocacy strategy, and that is to retest community, retest the children and see where they are in terms of this. Because as you might imagine, the way that this kind of situation happens is when this story is in the eye of the public, then something is being done. But for the first month, you have many organizations that are coming there once a month from the United Nations or European Union. They go to the community, they take photos, they take some tests, and then after that, for the next 5 to 10 years, the Roma people are left again on their own. And this is something quite alarming that still goes on. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. I think we're out of time.
Yeah, actually, please go ahead.
Paper, and there is also a report that together with my school we have done, so join the process and share what we do, because we do it for.
And because we have also questions and answers and comments, but first let's listen to Eva Schwab. Do you prefer to sit there or move up there?
Yeah, I'm going to sit here. Thank you.
And there is, if you could sit the remote there.
Okay, thank you for having me. I'm presenting a part of my postdoctoral research project that also overlaps partially with what I do for my PhD. So what I'm studying for my postdoc is a vigilantist neighborhood movement in Belgrade. This is a group of middle-class citizens. They are organizing against air pollution, and there are a lot of sources of air pollution in Belgrade, but they are organizing against one specific, and that is Roma waste collectors incinerating cables to extract copper. So this is the smelting activities that you also talked about, that's picked up on. And vigilantism is a form of civic activism In this case, the neighborhood draws attention to state inaction, and they want to make up for this. They advocate for more policing, and the way they do that is semi-legal activities of posting pictures of individual waste workers who are burning these materials, and also posting the number plates of vehicles online. So all of that is infringing, obviously, on the rights of privacy of these individuals. And this is happening on social media and like some of them private groups, but some of them also public. I've been mostly observing the public groups. And these pictures are also posted to the communal inspection in their Twitter account called Beocom, and that's what I'm focusing on. It's technologies of citizen engagement. That's the venues that the state is opening for citizens. Basically, what my argument is to engage in these vigilantist practices. And yeah, I first want to say something about the smelting activities, where they come from and where they became so prolific in Belgrade. This is okay. I forgot the picture. So this is the kind of pictures that they are posting online. Some of them are quite anonymous. They are just smoke clouds, but then also like pictures from very close up to Roma settlements. And yeah, I'm going to speak later on about the protest movement that you see below and the waste collection action. Yeah, so I want to say something about the smelting activities, where they became so prolific in Belgrade, and this is related to processes of urban restructuring. Between 2013 and 2021, Belgrade underwent a lot of urban reconstruction projects, and this can be seen from the amount of construction waste that is dumped, which increased by 5 times in a period of only 8 years. And these this construction waste very frequently ends up in the city in various locations, because the city government also privatized the waste management at the same time and introduced landfill tax. So construction companies want to dodge the landfill tax and just dump anywhere. And very frequently they dump in construction sites. So this one that you see on the picture, that is in Čukarica, that's where I'm doing my field research. This is a major site of smelting activities as well. I worked there one summer and collected metal wastes. So the construction companies are allowed to dump rubble, which is cleaned of metal waste. But very frequently what they bring is very polluted rubble, which should actually be brought to the landfill and not be used as foundation for building projects. And the wild dumping that overlapped also with mass evictions of Roma settlements from inner city areas. So between 2009 and 2012, there have been various evictions of informal settlements, which affected around 5,000 people. And Roma that were displaced, or waste collectors that were displaced from these inner city areas, also didn't have, so they didn't have so much access anymore to communal waste, which they collected massively before. So that's paper and PET plastic, because these materials are enclosed as well in underground containers due to the privatization of waste management. And all of these factors together, the privatization of waste management, the forced evictions, and these massive building activities brought Roma waste collectors to occupy new sites of waste valorization. And this is mostly the wild dumps, and is mostly metal waste now. So we can see that due to the political economy of urban restructuring, these smelting activities are happening. And a lot of the waste collectors were before collecting much less polluting materials, which are now enclosed. So yeah, the smelting activities can be definitely related to this, to the process of urban restructuring and waste management privatization. Yeah, this is the project that's going to be built in this side of a wild dump where I did my field research. It's Tesla City. The project is still contested. That's also where the new metro is going to be built. Yeah, so what is interesting is that in the case of this wild dump is that it's close to the main drinking water source of Belgrade, and when we look at the activities of waste collection, it's actually a clearing of the polluting materials. So they are taking out the metals that could be causing groundwater pollution, and yet the waste workers are blamed for pollution due to the smelting activity. So this is an interesting conjuncture in this site. And what I want to turn now is to the technologies of governance that the city government adopted towards wild dumps that actually reproduce environmental racism, and that circumvent a more complex discussion about the political economy of urban restructuring and of the waste economy. Yeah, so the first technology of governance that I want to turn to is monitoring of wild dumps. So already in the early 2000s, the government made efforts to map out wild dumps as they are occurring on the city territory, and they used mostly GPS for that. So just to have pictures and to know in which locations they have to send the public sanitation services for a cleanup. And then over time, this governance technique became more complex, and the communal inspection asked the single municipalities to go out and survey the wild dumps, so to write reports on the wild dumps. And the reports conclude information on the history, on the risk of groundwater pollution in that very location. And then also municipalities were encouraged to include information on the proximity of certain populations, especially war veterans. And so this is a very also deprived population in Belgrade, many of them homeless, and Roma. And we see here that and the rationale behind that was that the proximity of this population could be counted as a risk factor for the wild dump to reoccur in the same location. So the idea was to tie the occurrence of wild dumps to the conduct of a specific population. Yeah, so this was then framed as the financial risk increasing for the municipality because the site could reoccur and they would need again to invest in cleaning. And what is interesting about this monitoring of wild dumps, so the very way in which these were monitored, is that they turn the surveillance into a biopolitical project where the wild dump is then tied to the need to conduct the conduct of a certain population, and where the occurrence is can be also eliminated by displacement of that population. And all of that obviously completely circumvents the whole background story of how the wild dumps are tied into urban reconstruction processes. Yeah, that's what I just said. So this is about the that the occurrence of wild dumps is then made a question of the cleanliness and the right conduct of a specific population. That's something that I also observed in my field site. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm just going to stop this.
You can take your time because we have one speaker.
Okay. So in the site of my field research, the municipality organized a cleanup action and reported back that they were very successful in cleaning up, and that part of this cleanup was to reach an agreement with the Roma population that they wouldn't that they promised to keep their settlement clean. So yeah, again, it's about it's a question of cleanliness, and it's not the question of that this economic activity is completely omitted. And it's also interesting from the perspective of this new public management that social beneficiaries are engaged with in this contractual form, that they should make certain agreements and should make certain promises in order to become beneficiaries of municipal cleaning action, which they should be beneficiaries of anyway as inhabitants of the municipality. Yeah, so now I want to talk about this citizen engagement. So there are two ways in which the city government started to enlist citizen participation in this biopolitical project of managing wild dumps. One is related, the first is related to surveillance. In I think 2009, the city government issued this this mobile application, which is called Report the Wild Dump, and you can download with GPS location. I think also, yeah, you can definitely add a picture and then also add text to this, and the information is then uploaded to communal inspection, and you see that these wild dumps are reported all over Serbia. The application was then further developed at some point to report the communal problem. And then people could submit all kinds of things, like I think most prominently misplaced cars in public space, or something that's not working in terms of infrastructure. But citizens also use this application and the communal inspection Twitter account to post these vigilantist pictures of Roma settlements. And this article that you see on the left side, that's posted on this very prominent recycling blog in Serbia, asks, is the application about reporting the dump or reporting the person causing the dump, so Divjaka, the white person who's not tending to the law. Yeah, I think that that this is not a coincidence, that the applications which are officially directed towards reporting objects are then turned into reporting subjects, because we could also already see that this biopoliticization of the problem of wild dumps from the very way that municipalities were encouraged to report on them. So this is already like the background story to the application, even if it's not said explicitly. Yeah, and the second dimension, the second dimension of this enlisting citizen participation in this biopolitical governance of wild dams is the performance of the right conduct towards waste management. And this started in 2009 when all over Serbia there was a popular cleaning action called We Clean Serbia. And here on the right side, you see the then mayor of Belgrade, Dragan Đilas, engaging in this very noble efforts of cleaning wild dumps. And on the left side, you see the neighborhood movement that I'm doing my research on, also showcasing themselves that they are not only posting vigilantes pictures of pollution, but that they are actually the proto-citizen in terms of environmental conduct. So they have constantly these pictures of waste cleaning actions, of planting trees, and how they could make the neighborhood more green alongside this this calling out of the polluters and unconscientious individuals. Yeah, and finally, I just want to turn to air pollution protests to show sort of the ripple effects of these governing technologies, how they translate then into something that could already be called ecofascism, and has been also called out like this. So just a short chronology of air pollution protests, and that's my last point. So they started as a left political project in Belgrade in 2017 by Ne Davimo Belgrade, which is yeah, exactly. So which is we don't let Belgrade drown in English, and this is a political movement that organized in the beginning against Belgrade waterfront investment project, but then they also turned against the privatization of waste management, against the construction of the waste incinerator, and they support more sustainable transport and renewable energy in Belgrade. So that was their list of demands regarding air pollution. And then in 2020 enters the stage Eco Straja, which is ecological ward. So they already have this very security-focused name. And their demand is for secure air and not for clean air, which is very interesting, I think. And what they are demanding is more power to individual citizens to report other citizens who are engaging in this air pollution. So they basically want vigilantism to be legalized. Yeah, so this is a picture from one of their protests, which is the air is dangerous. Yeah, and this is from a picture also from the neighborhood where I'm doing my research. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for the great presentation. And now I would invite Tamara as our discussant to reflect. And you can stay there, or we can put a chair for you. Maybe you are yeah, just online, but you could be visible as well.
I'll swing around.
Yeah, whatever you prefer. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for these presentations and for the papers. Just really compelling in terms of the detail and data. So I'm going to read a bit from my from what I've written based on my thoughts and reflections in your papers. So pollution is obviously the thread that runs through, and hence you coming together in this panel. And each paper sort of addresses the main sort of stigmatizing elements. Sergen, for example, says, pollution refers to bad pollution, follows the poor. You've referred to so Roma communities across Central and Eastern and Southeastern Europe often live and work in polluted or degraded environments. And you refer to Heidegger and Weiss on that. And in your paper, Ava, you mentioned a condition where we all, quote unquote, breathe heavily, but some heavier than others. So this is the theme through these papers. And a prominent theme along those lines is a severe lack of accountability or responsibility on the part of formal official institutions in different ways in Ava's paper, but in very significant and direct ways in the first two papers that were presented. But also the severe deficiencies in asserting public acknowledgement of the fundamental and prominent role of anti-Roma racism. In Sergen's paper entitled The Impact of Modernization and Industrialization Policies on the Roma Communities in Turkey, for example, he notes that none of the official efforts, and you even mentioned this in your presentation, to clean up the Ergene River, quote unquote, addressed how the risks posed by environmental degradation in the Ergene Basin might affect Roma, and quote, do not address human elements and protective measures for minorities and groups at risk of multiple discrimination. In Berisha et al., can I say that, or I should list everyone's name? Maybe I will say it because everyone definitely deserves credit in terms of this tremendous work. In this paper, the UN failed to not only fully and publicly recognize the egregious discrimination in this case, but pulled back on their obligation to deliver a sincere apology that specifically recognized the severity of the offense against the Roma, in particular in this case. So there's this, it's like multiple assaults, but this one is especially striking. So in Ava's paper entitled Technologies of Participatory Governance and Environmental Racism, I'll cut it short, and that may be one of my feedback to all of you, is that shorter title. And not for the sake of discussants, but so, and while from a different angle or in more complex ways, in Ava's case that she presents, we find the rollback of a peripheral state, and that civic mobilization around environmental cleanup efforts is racialized and at the same time excluding while also targeting the Roma. Okay, you've heard them say that. I'm kind of summarizing these points. History is also critical in each case, in varying degrees in the papers. It's difficult to garner hope with such long historical anti-Roma racism that lives over and again into the present. It beckons our pessimism regarding the potential inevitability in the future. However, it reveals not only the historical continuity of destructive and violent racial identity by various authorities and regimes, but also the striking perseverance of the Roma themselves. The Roma prove also, in many ways, to persevere in the face of tremendous struggles, to put it lightly, imposed upon them. And the depth of the struggle and loss, as well as the persistence of the affected Romani communities, is especially revealed in the work by Driton, Beatrice, Michaela, Jake, Ariel, and Ariel. And this is in a grueling administrative process that endures for how many years? That's just unbelievable. That's the lifetime of a young teenager. So So endured for 15 years, and despite some victories, has yet to make up for the losses, suffering, and severe damages caused by UN actions and negligence, as you point out. It's 10,000 is really an insult in a way. Also, Sergen's work that eloquently articulates the convincing details of an egregious case, also of what I would say sociospatial stigmatization with implications for health and migration, also reveals a certain collective Roma endurance in the face of sanctioned injustices dating back to the Ottoman Empire and evolving into modern day Turkey. It hasn't been an easy road. I don't want to make light of that. But I do want to draw attention to the persistence as well there. Imagine going through an administrative process with the United Nations for 15 years. If you do that, that's persistence and strength, and still going. On the other side, I'm going to say something a bit uncomfortable for me here. This requires a brief mention of the work by Jelena Savic, who wasn't here, on the Gaido Green Deal, Roma Lost in the Balkan Transitions, that could not be presented here today. What I liked about that paper is that, like the other papers also, the perpetrators are especially visible. And the importance of this cannot be overstated, as the privileged, me included, have some serious and ongoing work to do. Each paper, so now I'm going to switch gears a bit and talk about something that I think is my main feedback sort of moving forward in the papers. And it's a bit academic-y, I will admit. And maybe even a bit of epistemic colonialism in the fact that in academia, in Western academia, we have a certain process of having a theoretical and conceptual framework. And so I want to draw attention to that. So each paper engages a particular conceptual framework related to environmental justice or environmental races in some way or another. However, the frameworks could more closely align with the case study data and the problems that they expose. So allow me to just convey this point in the case of each paper. And it's not only about having, you must have a theoretical and conceptual framework kind of thing, but really that brings focus. And that also brings the value of each of the work pieces beyond its own case. And so the paper that most explicitly engages a theoretical framework is Sergen's paper. And Sergen asserts some of the prominent historical conceptualizations of environmental justice based on earlier work in the US by Mohai and Bullard that emphasize distribution. He ultimately, however, settles on a framework proposed by Lashley in the analysis and he brings it back in the end, that emphasizes access to information, participation in decision-making processes, the role of history in understanding the causes of environmental injustices, and finally, the implications of racial and classist-based conflicts for the environment. However, based on the data, the notion of sociospatial stigmatization, which I mentioned before, with its implications for health and persistence, even in migration, even when migration emerges. So for example, in that kind of concept, the stigmatization moves with, and that's what your interviewees also say, it goes with. They move together, as it were, as central to the processes manifested in the Basin. It more closely links to the compelling and detailed data presented in the case that included this historical overview and in-depth case study and interviews. I really liked how you brought all that different data to bear. You know, secondary statistical data on pollution issues as well, the stories, the interviews, the history. So really tremendous work in that context. But I think, you know, we have a tendency when we're trying to write a paper, yeah, we draw on these basic theories like, yeah, it's this, and then we get down to the real work of writing what this story is. But I think in your case, these two, this concept of socio-spatial stigmatization would really bring this out, and this long history, really draw out this long history of how people and, you know, and pollution are stigmatized, you know, polluted places, people in place are stigmatized together. They move together. And if you want to say,
I want to say something. Actually, beginning of my research, I hadn't known that I noticed is in area best. First, I thought that it could be river pollution, and I contacted the people, as I said, Ahmed, with when we came from Greece, and he said he explained the real issue in the not just the pollution and also identity. After that, I started to analyze the cases and also laws, other things. And also the beginning of my talk, I talked with you.
yes, yes. Yeah,
so
before it
you
was
should
for
work
pollution aspects, and then
yeah.
yeah, you did that case justice in that process. And I like how the interviews brought in the idea of this migration issue.
But
Well,
I think that also I refer on my article. Migration issue is not just about the marginalization or racism. And it's also about how can I say, you know, in technology, it comes bring us the very how can I say, very easy way. You know? We don't need a lot of people for working the agricultural area because we have technology things. It's also
yeah, the circumstances.
yes.
Yeah, in your case, it's an interesting sort of competition of you know, between, and this is the case throughout the world, the competition between the economy, so in this case, industrial pollution and so on, that goes with that, and livelihoods. Okay, in the next case, on the lead poisoning, and the UN, the notion of environmental racism is asserted, and while applicable, is not fully explained or explored from a theoretical or empirical standpoint. The main framework in this case, however, for me, is indicated in the text, particularly drawn out at the end, which is the inherent limitations of relying on legal or formal and official mechanisms to overcome structural racism and achieve justice. Or promote environmental justice for that matter. This has been marginally explored in the past in other research. I've read other research that addressed a similar issue, how, wow, we keep taking them to court, for example, but it's not changing much. But I think this makes an important contribution to environmental justice scholarship and activism. This paper's focus not only compellingly details the egregious violations and negligence on the part of the UN, reputed, quote unquote, from the paper global, you know, that was global beacon in human rights and racial equality, a source of human rights, which makes it just, you know, triply, quadruply egregious, right? But convinces us that official forums for rectifying injustices are not necessarily immune to racist power dynamics. And on the contrary, a literature review engaging some of that research to date, like pulling together what do we already know about this. I would like to see that. What are we learning from this, these kinds of research on this very issue? This would allow the paper's impact to go beyond the case, although the case is plenty enough to deal with. So yeah, maybe let somebody else do this. It presents to explore these important questions for those in pursuit of environmental justice. So what are the challenges of rectifying environmental injustice through formal channels? How effective or ineffective can they be, and under what circumstances? But this one shows, right, clearly in the case of the UN, there's no one sort of overseeing the UN and holding them accountable. So that's a, yeah, real challenge there. In Eva Schwab's paper, we find several areas of interest that frame that research, the research from both a theoretical as well as an empirical standpoint. And the challenge here in your paper, Eva, is there's a lot of them. So including technologies of participatory governance, as expressed in the title, as well as vigilantism, vigilantist civic engagement, governmental technology of agency. These didn't come out in your presentation, but they're in the short research idea concept that you put together. E-democracy and e-governance, regulatory gaps and fissures, environmental stewardship, securitization of cities, demand management, and surveillance. This is a full scholarship. But the navigational aspects of this ship are not yet clear. Perhaps because you're really coming at it from an empirical standpoint, which I like that. And now you're trying to figure out, okay, where the lines, where the threads are. At least that's my impression. So they're not yet, the navigational aspects are not yet clear, perhaps because this is an exploratory research proposal as the way that you've written the paper at this stage. So while there are many angles that could be taken here, only a few conceptual avenues can be straddled at best. Of interest here, although I see now in your presentation, you're really coming out with this security issue and vigilantism. So this doesn't fully recognize that. But of interest here, as Eva notes, is how people define and differentiate pollution and its causes along racial lines, right? You think of, the pollution problems in the world, and I mean, I'm sorry to say, but is it your neighbor burning something, or is it climate change? And what's causing global significant impact? Not to say that, yeah, we don't want to figure out how to work through all of that, but and holding, for example, holding the state accountable for pollution, it's clearly along racial lines. But as Eva also notes, it reveals the false promises of participation of the civic engagement platform and addresses state inaction at the same time. At the same time, the mobilization can be read as hijacked and part of an agenda to cleanse the city not only of waste, but also of racialized polluting, quote unquote, polluting others. This indicates an important conceptual pathway based on contemporary environmental justice scholarship debates, namely the challenge of, for example, this is just one, namely the challenge of David Schlossberg's work. He was the one who initiated this environmental justice framework that was based on studies of environmental justice movements that said the main issues that they struggle for are distribution and participation and recognition. And later on, he added capacities as well. But now the problem is, right, when we talk about participation, when you get into it in practical terms, participation doesn't really work like we would like it to necessarily. So while participation is indeed important in practice, it can lack meaningful engagement, follow-up, and inclusivity, and end up looking good only on paper. And your case shows us some of the complexities, and that's what I like, in many different ways that one might not even expect. Another point of question evoked in this research is how people conceptualize the environment, which can be a gateway to purist ideology across the ecological and human landscape, as you already mentioned in terms of eco-fascism, where purity and pristineness of land is translated to purity and pristineness of humans. And we all know who gets to define pure and what that constitutes and what it doesn't. Understanding more about how the environment is conceptualized without justice would be an interesting also avenue. Just your ideas spark a lot of different, because it's in these early stages where a lot is going on. And so I just wanted to add that one. Although apparently challenged by access to interviewees. Okay. So in this, my own long paper about your papers, I'll just wrap up some final thoughts, which maybe some of them I've already said. So in your paper, I really like this integration of different data where you tell us the history. That's really, really important. You tell us the history, and you bring in the voices as well. You take us there, and I think that sort of brings in this richness and detail to convey the issues. It's interesting that there are these historically nationalistic implications based on socio-spatial segmentation. I find that, and then, in the second paper, broader implications of this profound and detailed research. So moving it beyond, and what can you advise others about this, when the system is ineffective and lacks accountability? And I'd love to hear more about that and how, how is this persistence sustained amongst yourselves in fighting this, going through this for so many years? How do you do that? That would probably be really valuable to know how you persist in this, in the face of this. And then being able to sleep at night, right? When there's racial discrimination, and then the UN tries to blame the Roma for this situation. I don't know. And finally, Ava, in your work, disentangling the issues will allow this complexity, which counters the black and white, right, of the case study details. I'm looking forward to seeing how do you pull those apart to tell that story, because it's kind of, right, the first impression is one goes, great civic engagement, online platform or what have you with pollution. And you come in to tell us the complexity of the story. And so, so I'm really looking forward to that. Thank you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara, for the extensive and in-depth comments, which we appreciate for the discussion, also for you to rework your paper. What I suggest that please remember the comments and questions, but also I would invite others to comment in the room, and also online we have some questions coming in. But I would start with people who are in the room, because you made here, and you can just raise your hand. I think there is no microphone. We hear you, so please I give you the floor first. Yeah, and maybe you could just introduce yourself. Yes.
Definitely. I'm Tanya Vasic. I'm a psychologist working here in Vienna as consultant in the Roma project. I'm 25 years in the Roma movement, married to Roma, and coming from Belgrade. Belgrade is my hometown. So I know the history of all this, what is they were now mentioning, and very happy to hear all that as this abstract as a work, because that's very important issue. But I just want to make a comment because
Tamara.
Yeah, Tamara said, and I think the history is very important with all these issues, because there is a link between that Kosovo story and Belgrade story. Actually, we have started to work with Roma at the time of the refugees from Kosovo were coming to Belgrade, and the organization of my husband, the organization that we were leading at that time, the Democratic Association of Roma, well known as ADUR at that time, was almost the only. There was one another from my brother-in-law organization, when I have to say that, and we were welcoming refugees from Kosovo and the Roma refugees from Kosovo. So there was no state response to the refugees from Kosovo, to Roma refugees from Kosovo. So all other refugees in the wars in the Balkans were welcomed in Belgrade by the officials and by state. Roma refugees never. So they were left on their own. And these settlements that are now existing in Belgrade, most of them are existing upon the wave of refugees that came, homeless people with no chance to sort out the paper, the documents. They're officially the people with the document of Republic of Serbia, of Yugoslavia at that time. But at the end of the day, there was a game between Serbia, Kosovo, and UN, and they were described as internally displaced people instead of being refugees, etc., etc. So they were a game, and the outcome, what I would really like to emphasize, is the environmental racism is an outcome as a state response that we have to really put a label on it. It's a state response to Roma troubles in the West Balkan wars, in the Balkan wars next to Yugoslavia and the last conflict with Kosovo. And unfortunately, these people are still living in unbearable conditions. They still live in the settlements, and I think that Eva saw that without water, without electricity, without canalization, so everything is missing. They're still discriminated by state, and this problem when the settlements are, they try to move them or just to replace them, or but when they have no investments there. And we were fighting a long time in Belgrade against such issues, but at the end of the day, they never made any really solution. And you have the photo of a major of Belgrade at that time, Gilas, but the situation is now even worse, I think. So there was a big pressure that one settlement under the main bridge in Belgrade, they have to move. They moved the settlement. They have given containers in some part of Belgrade, but the people again were displaced from there. The problem is those people living in those settlements are the people with the lowest chances to be integrated in the mainstream society because lack of education, lack of many other issues. So they collect waste and they live off from that, they earn from collecting waste. So they, as well, you cannot displace them out of Belgrade because they cannot then sell that waste that they collect. So it's and the state is not even trying to find any other solution. And now on top of all that, we have that Ekostraža. I'm always upset thinking of that because I'm from Vienna, fighting against Ekostraža, trying to discuss the issue within these topics in Belgrade. So I just want to say that at the time when we were living in Belgrade, and that was until 2008, we have settled down that is not existing any longer, the first cooperative of waste collectors. So we managed to at least to educate group of waste collectors of the risks of collecting waste and helping them with assistance of WHO and some other the public health institution in Belgrade to train them, at least to give them an overview what are the possible risks. As well, we have managed at that time to that they have opportunity to be coded in a national agency for employment. So they can now at least pay for their pension and health insurance, which was not even possible before that. So not many of them are using that opportunity, but at least this opportunity is existing. And it's a long story. It's like they say 15 years, but even more than that, 25 years. It's a struggle just with Roma for Kosovo, and nobody is really, UN is not really even thinking of accepting what all problems they caused by not reacting in time. Now we have the 13th of June is going to be very soon in 12 days, and that is the day of Roma exodus from Kosovo as an official date. So yeah, Western Balkans is not the question still.
Thank you so much. Other comments, questions, please, Angela. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the paper. It was really, really interesting, terribly said as well. And thanks for the comments, Tamara. It was so great and really, really, really important. Anyway, I don't want to go into detail, but one thing which really stuck me with this Kosovo thing, the lead poisoning, and I can't believe, like when we start to talk about it, it was like years ago, and reading and hearing about it, and here you right now, I'm just sitting here and thinking about what the hell we can do, really. I mean, I would be just curious about your advocacy plan. So what can we do, and what are the challenges, and what can you see as a future steps, and how can we help in that?
Yeah, and please remember it, because I want to collect also in the room and online. We have some already questions, comments. Please, Magda, you can, yeah.
But I can wait if someone else, especially if student has something to say.
Please go ahead, yeah, and then others will have opportunity as well, yeah.
Okay, I have a couple of comments and questions for all of you, so please bear with me. I'll try to make it as short as possible, and I'll start with you, Sergen. And thank you so much for writing this thoughtful paper, especially. I really like how you looked at this continuum of injustices and really not making a break between past and present. And I think that in thinking about your paper, and I'm sorry I haven't had a chance to read any of them, but I think it would be great to really emphasize this continuum of injustice as a feature, as a major feature of anti-Roma racism, or as the structural feature of anti-Roma racism, of course, along with these intersectional and interactional features of this form of racism. And I wonder if in your paper you make any comparison, or if you look at other solutions and other ways of thinking in other spaces. I'm thinking, for instance, quickly about the United States and the case of Flint and environmental racism there. How do you draw comparisons and relations between various geographies and various cases, various oppressions? And then Bea, Driton, and also Sebastian, thank you so much for your work. I think Angela put it right. This is not just research, this is much more than that. What you do is basically shedding light on an injustice that has been there for 15 years now. And I agree with you, Tamara, 10,000 is an insult if you think about the trust fund. But I also feel that the trust fund is an insult in itself.
Yeah, as a form.
And it's, I think that while listening to you, on one hand, I feel that yes, this is what the Roma want. When you say that the Roma want to administrate the trust fund themselves, and I say, well, this is what they want. At the same time, I just feel, just thinking about the literature on reparations, as Roy Brooks would say, without a statement of apology, this looks just as a settlement.
Yeah.
And even thinking about the United Nations framework of reparations, where are the compensations, the rehabilitation, the guarantee of non-repetition, and all these 5 features of repair. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about this process of communicating with the community and thinking about repair, and acknowledging that this is from a position of disempowerment, disinvestment, aside of that eventually. And I think that one of you that mentioned this idea that, some 15 years have passed and some young people are now, adults or so, but 15 years have passed and many children have actually died on that side. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit more about the Roma victims themselves and how they see this form of repair, especially if they were to have a little bit more power on that. And finally, and I promise I'll stop in a minute, Marton, I really liked your biopolitics lens in thinking about this paper and your research. And I think that particularly in thinking about clean air, one question there, which would be related to what Tamara said, was really what do the data show about the main sources of pollution in Serbia, and then starting from there, seeing why waste collectors, are targeted. And I think that there is a nexus between the shift from this narrative of clean air to the narrative of secure air and the vigilante groups. And you pointed to it beautifully. And perhaps, just going back to your theoretical framework, knowing that with the birth of the nation states, the sovereign power to kill has somehow, died. But at the same time, I see it in the way that you present your paper, how it is reclaimed by the state through this imposition of a state of emergency or a state of security. So therefore, by framing this as a security matter or as a matter of secure air, you basically give the state the power to kill, which shifts a little bit from the idea of let Roma die, which whatever the states in Europe do, but in case seems like reclaiming the power to kill. And using the vigilante as a method to do that. And I wonder if you can reflect a little bit more about this idea, this connection between what happens in Serbia and these groups and the idea of biopolitics from this perspective of the murderous function of the state, if you want.
Thank you so much. Please remember the questions and comments. Please, yes.
I just have just a very quick question for Sergen. My name is Karen White. I'm from the Atlantic Technological University in Ireland, and my background is social anthropology and Byzantine studies. And I just have a little question to a little detail in your historical context, where you gave a quote which somehow implied that Roma people were not welcome or excluded in the Ottoman Empire. And I just want to relate that to Evliya Effendi, who writes in the 17th century, describes a big procession of the guilds, and where Roma people very, very solidly represented within the guilds in the Ottoman Empire as buza makers, horse stealers, innkeepers, and dancing boys, and musicians and entertainers, and also often quoted as taxpayers in the Ottoman Empire. So I'm just wondering how this fits together with your quote you gave on Roma people being excluded and not allowed from the Ottoman Empire. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, please.
I have a question, if maybe you have a good comment more, because as you know, the current political situation in Serbia is actually quite against any sort of protest that is not pro current regime. Any kind of effort that you're doing or that the people in Serbia are doing, how did you meet them? How are they being met with the main political structure of Serbia?
Yes, any final comments, questions in the room before we go online? because I could see online as well in the chat. I don't know, I would encourage persons if they are still here, because I know that Ilyana Sarafian asked the question and Diana Popescu. If you would like to ask your question, or I can read it. If any of you are still here. Yeah, maybe Diana, please, and you can ask your question. Ilyana as well, you asked the question in the chat. Please go ahead, Diana. Yeah.
Hey, first of all, thank you so much for the wonderful presentations that you gave. They're so well researched and thought-provoking. And one of the things that it made me think about is how much of a blind spot there is about the effects of pollution on the Roma minority, in contrast to how much emphasis there is on the effects of pollution on the global south. So my question, and it's open to all presenters to intervene, is why do you think there is this discrepancy? Why do you think climate justice movements seem to focus preponderantly on between country discrepancies between the global north, so-called, and the global south that's supposed to be facing disproportionate impacts, but not enough focus on within country discrepancies, with the Roma always being disproportionately affected by pollution, but somehow outside of this conference, there's very little acknowledgement of that. So based on your research, do you have any hypothesis or anything interesting that comes up with respect to why there is this blind spot? One of the things you would think of is it's racism, but it must be a particular form of racism that is perhaps interesting for you to discuss, because in the global south, you also have people of different races. So I'm wondering if there's anything maybe structurally that comes to mind about this discrepancy. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you. And I don't know if Ilyana is here, who also asked the question in the chat, or I can read if she is not here. It's addressed to Driton and Beatrice. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about the mapping of inequalities, whether compounding effects of lead poisoning are only considered by the UN within a past frame and not focused on the future. For example, lead poisoned Roma children's general health, cognitive and social abilities would have been severely affected, and this would have had a detrimental effect on their futures, including social mobility, better access to employment and education. So it's the question of destroying not only the present, but also the future of these children. And anyone else online who would like to ask a question, you can also just unmute yourself, put on your camera, or we can move to the presenters.
Hello.
Yes, please.
Hello, I'm Genoveva Sotirova from Bulgaria. I'll be very short. I have a question. Why Roma woman is not empowered even now in the context of climatic change, of the racial inequality and etc. Because many Roma women, if they live in ghetto and they're very easy victim to the sexual traffic exploitation, and not only this, they're sexual violation in workplace. This is my small opinion about Roma integration. That's all.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Any other final comments or questions? Or I would invite now the panelists. We still have a bit of time, but to try to limit yourself to 5-6 minutes if possible, and choose the questions that you like the most and the comments. And we can go in whatever order, but would you like to start, Sergen, as the first speaker to reflect to some of the questions and comments you received?
One of the questions was related to how I arranged my paper, as I understood. First of all, I am coming from this community, yeah, and I grew up in this neighborhood, which is near to the Ergene River, and I have lots of story about it. But even I know this settlement, but I haven't known that there are different things that I should address in my life. Because when I go to the field site research, and it's changing what you want to say in your hands and what is the real issue in this setting. After my interview, I understood that there is not just a coalition issue, there is also identity issue. And then I go through the main reasons of the environmental inequalities in Ergene Basin. I thought that it could be something that we should, that it affects the Roma living in the Ergene Basin. And I found the racist laws and institutional marginalization and etc. Then it was very hard to me to bring them to each other and connect and also create this historical paper. It takes time. It took time, but yeah, I read lots of research related to environmental justice, and then I think that I managed. Yeah, this was the question I addressed. And another, I think that she said, what's the racist law in Ottoman Empire? As far as I understood, what's the situation of the Roma in Ottoman Empire? Actually, we should look at with a different perspective. Which period we want to address? Yes, the last period of the Ottoman Empire, Roma people were living in a community maybe, but in the center, how can I say, in the second period, or it depends on which period we are addressing. And if you look at the racist law, there are lots of but also we should look to another countries at that time, because the history affect to each other. For example, I addressed the 1913s that Roma must distribute to the Turkish base to be assimilated. At that time, the Holocaust and lots of things affect each other. And I hope that I addressed your questions.
Thank you. Maybe we can move on to Beatrice and Driton. Yeah.
I think in general, we are asking how does it continue to happen, and especially in the red poisoning case, it has been really a long process and very much ignored by those that shouldn't have been ignored, but very much remembered and paid attention by those that were hurt most, and those are the Roma people and the Roma activists, and yeah. So I feel, and I think we're witnesses to governments and systems discriminating Roma people based on their belief. That very much is similar to what we get as a response from UN, and it is that Roma people are used to such living conditions. It is fine, they do, it is what they want. And they fail to remind themselves of how good actually victims they are of the system itself that they are running. And secondly, we see that we have all these long processes that don't change. Also because I feel that Roma people are not encouraged enough to change their situations, and they don't have examples where they have reacted and they have changed their own situation, that they have helped their own community. And it's something that we as Opre Roma, we try to do this. We are trying to, encourage Roma activism, Roma participation, and in the case of the lead poisoning in Mitrovica, we want the victims to the Roma community there to feel as they are, they have the chance of getting what they deserve and get remedies and compensated for the hurt that they have gone through. And we mentioned the trust fund as an insult. I think it's very much, yes, an insult and something that is expected, to just stay there and feel like everything's okay, let's go on. It's very common actually to be done with the Roma people. You just give them a little bit of bread pieces and then you just go like, okay, we've done the work. Or you go and do things for the Roma people without the Roma. But I think we are very much clear. The Roma people in the Roma Mahala are very much clear, and they don't want to hear about general Roma projects where they just get targeted, and in many cases they're not even the primary beneficiaries. It ends up in other hands. So they are very clear about it, that they want to be able to decide about it. Now, to know exactly what are they going to spend it on and how, it is something that they have to be given the chance to actually discuss this about, as being aware that they have the chance. But in our meetings with them, we realized that there are families that wish to use them for health, for a recovery, and this is just one of the issues. Secondly, perhaps they want to create a more safer lives for their family, for their children, for the future, and they do deserve this. They should be given this opportunity to make the decision themselves. But yeah, it's very hard, as I said before, that proving them that we can that we can make a change. This is a problem to make. It is a huge problem to make a change inside of a country with a government that many times has a position perhaps maybe you can use. But if you're going to work with the UN and you go against UN, trust me, even the governments don't want to do that. And we do have a problem with a lot of people feeling for us, expressing empathy, including some of the UN officials, some of which have done it publicly and some of which have prefer to stay anonymous. But we have the empathy and we have understanding and the agreement, general agreement, we know what happened here. But it's a fact that we believe that at some point we will make it, or at least make it even more clear. And this is what we say to the Roma people. But I would love Beatrice to add some more here, because she can talk more about the ongoing activities and meetings you're working on and some sort of plans. I don't know, something you must have.
One thing. So I first want to acknowledge that I come to this issue really stepping onto the shoulders of giants who have been pushing this issue for so many years, and I can take very little credit for the perseverance that has gone into this, and that I was not a part of bringing the legal efforts. I'm a relative newcomer to the issue in that it came onto my radar screen back in 2011 when I was working as a lawyer trying to pursue remedies for victims of cholera in Haiti that was introduced by UN peacekeepers that in Haiti led to the deaths of 10,000 people. And so what I bring to this issue is intimate familiarity with trying to advocate before the UN for reparations in these types of environmental justice cases. And I'm really grateful for the partnerships and for you all welcoming me here to be able to contextualize this within the broader historical struggles led by Roma communities around the world, because I think that context is so important. And as much as the perseverance by so many is very real, I also want to acknowledge that the fatigue is very real, and I think that that's something that we've experienced over and over again in speaking to the affected communities, speaking to activists who have been fighting this issue for a long time, and just speaking for myself, sitting within the Human Rights Clinic at Harvard Law School. so in 2011, we started having conversations with the lawyers who were bringing the cases on behalf of the Roma communities and saw a lot of synergies and some of the barriers that we were facing. And so it's an issue that I've long been interested in and have followed a lot. But when we first started to think about, can we get involved in some way? A lot of the feedback we were getting was, well, what could you possibly do given that everyone has tried to move this issue forward? And I think that still very much holds true, and it's a legitimate question whether we can do anything. At the same time, I think we also put this question to the community when we met with them to say, do you want us to take this up? Because we are aware that you've been fighting this for so long, and we don't want to continue to re-traumatize by bringing this issue up over and over. And I think that the message was quite clear that the push for reparations from the community is still very strong. It was really striking in our meeting with a number of parents who came with thick stacks of documents. They're still holding on to the records of the blood tests that were done on their children years ago. And so I think with that mandate, we've been pushing forward. And in the context of doing advocacy, which much of our work has really been focused on advocacy at the UN and with governments. And I think the tension that Micah pointed to is very real, in that there's a constant struggle between, do we stand on principle and point to the very documents that come from the UN itself that define reparations in a very holistic way? Or do we recognize the political realities that we're working within, where a public apology is likely going to be a non-starter, where alternative funding mechanisms at this point are just not really a question that the governments are willing to entertain. So the UN has set a target of 4.5 million for the trust fund. Of course, money is never going to be adequate as a form of remedy, no matter what the ultimate amount is. And there in particular, I think we've also faced the tension of, do we try to advocate for more? I think if you take a rights-based approach to how the UN should handle this, it should start with a conversation with the community, with a full assessment of the injuries. But I think, experienced in conversations with governments, officials' eyes kind of glazing over when you try to push that. There's an alternate version of this that says the UN committed 4.5 million. That's peanuts in the scope of the investments that you already have in Kosovo and in support of Roma communities. And so invest in making this a reality and ensure that it's done in a victim-centered way where there's more of a voice on the part of the affected community in determining how that money is spent. And so those are tensions that I think we haven't fully ironed out yet, but that we engage with on a regular basis. And so our approach at the moment is fairly laser focused on trying to persuade a handful of governments that are actively involved in Kosovo to form a group of like-minded states to get behind the idea of reparations for this community, to commit to providing financial investment, but also ensure that compensation is not taken off the table. And we've heard in conversation with governments, they'll say things like, but I heard from the UN that compensation isn't possible. What do you mean it's not possible? We know the money can be found. Really what they're worried about is legal precedent. And so there are very specific political challenges that we're trying to work around and trying to strategize on who can we convince to counter this narrative that compensation can't possibly happen. So this is my last point, to the question of what can we all do together, I do think that we're at a moment now where we've gotten the ear of a couple of key governments. The Special Rapporteur on Truth, Justice, and Reparation was in Kosovo on a country visit last fall, and will be presenting his report in Geneva in September, and we're seeing that as a key opportunity to bring back the spotlight on this issue and frame it in the context of reparations conversations. And so I think there are two things. One is that governments will also ask us, why this, why now? It happened so long ago. And I think the more that we can raise our voices together to emphasize that this is an ongoing injustice that merits correction, the better. And also I appreciate that we're here as a gathering of people from all across Europe and the world. And there are concrete opportunities for us each to identify ways that we can approach our own governments to try to push for this. Because I think the reality is that there's such little political will at the UN Secretariat that unless the message is coming from UN member states, it's hard to see that shifting. And so that's why we're focusing on governments while also recognizing the absurdity of turning to governments that are responsible for so many of the other injustices that we talked about here today.
I just want to add that we currently have a government in Kosovo that was not very friendly with the UN in the history. So with our attempts, we have seen not a large interest in going and discussing this sensitive issue coming to come for the government. But we are working on a document, a supportive document that will, we hope, speak on behalf of the people of Kosovo by having individual signatures of the members of the parliament of Kosovo. We have already had the support from the Roma MPs. We'll try to have them as well to help us out with more signatures and perhaps get more pressure.
If you may just add a real thing about how can they support us. We are talking about the possibility of organizing a big protest in the United Nations mission Kosovo. The way you can support us by joining us there.
Yeah. And you know that the United Nations is a huge headquarters in Vienna.
You go there next.
Yeah. Last but not least, I would invite Eva, and then we deserve, I think, a coffee break. But please, Eva, tackle the most important questions and comments.
Yeah, I think following, I think I want to address the question of the state complicity. So thank you for that comment about the history of these settlements and also how the cases are connected with the Kosovo case. Yeah, I think that's very important to mention how these settlements came into being in the first place and how there are such a huge population living from waste collection in Belgrade. Yeah, I think it's even if we only look at the last 15 years, we can see acts of state complicity in the recreation of these so-called unhygienic or environmental unjust living conditions with these container settlements that were very similar to your case, Beatrice and Driton, also set up in a temporary manner, just to have a housing solution for the displaced, so-called IDPs. And in the end, many of the social housing projects were not realized, and the container settlements were more or less abandoned, and the infrastructure was very poor. So you have this, a form of state neglect or abandonment, disinvestment, however you want to call it, which goes under the radar of the public very frequently, because the containers got a lot of attention, and even Belgradian citizens wanted to know how come that Roma are now entitled and franchised to get containers. And then when the containers were abandoned and they broke down, there was no press coverage about that process.
Were they pressured to abandon the containers? Or did they...
No, I mean abandoned by the state. So the state stopped providing, and the infrastructure basically broke down and caused a lot of problems also in the environment. I think this is also connects to your question, Marta, about the state of emergency. That a lot of the governmental technologies that I'm talking about, and now this also about the container settlements, they did arise in state of emergency. They are not like, or they first entered the stage in a state of emergency. For example, BEOCOM, this report the communal problem application, was first launched in the floods in 2014. When the government said, okay, now we have to reach out to our citizens to report to what kind of problems the flood left on Belgrade territory because the state doesn't have enough capacity to do the surveillance process. And then covertly, this application became the status quo, that now citizens are asked all the time to ask to report these communal problems. And yeah, basically use that for sort of environmental securitization narratives. Yeah, I think that's it. I just want to, yeah.
So thank you so much for this very powerful panel and also the discussion and all the contributions. I think it was an excellent start. Now we deserve a coffee break and we will continue at 4 o'clock sharp with more papers. Thank you so much.